Hola, ya estamos en la lección 10. Es la 10 de un total de 30 lecciones, la tercera parte de todo el curso. Esto significa que poco a poco vamos avanzando y aprendiendo más de la lengua española. En esta 10ª lección, vamos a empezar con un poco de vocabulario nuevo, para después trabajar con unos aspectos más de la pronunciación en español. Y mi idea es ayudarlos a evitar los problemas con la pronunciación de este idioma que tienen muchos estudiantes que hablan inglés. También, en esta lección vamos a repasar la manera de usar los pronombres de objeto directo de dos maneras, solos o con un pronombre de objeto indirecto. En mi opinión, es decir, desde mi punto de vista, usar un pronombre de objeto directo solo en una frase no es muy difícil, pero cuando se usan dos objetos, uno directo y otro indirecto, en la misma frase, eso sí es, a mi ver, bastante complicado. En esta lección vamos a poder practicar este tipo de construcción. Como tenemos mucho que hacer, es hora de empezar a trabajar juntos. Now that we're in our 10th lesson, you're hearing me speak more and more Spanish, as I just did in my introduction. And I hope you're using our tools of cognates, context, and conjecture to determine the meanings of the new vocabulary you hear. Were you able to figure out some of the new words I just used? Well, let's go over them just to be sure. One thing I said related to pronunciation was, mi idea es ayudarlos a evitar los problemas. So, my idea is to help you evitar problems. You might have been able to guess that the verb evitar means to avoid. Evitar is related to the English word inevitable, which of course means unavoidable. At one point in my introduction, I said, en mi opinión, which you can probably guess in English means in my opinion. So our new cognate is, repitan, la opinión. I also said, desde mi punto de vista. We've seen the noun el punto, which in English means point. You might guess that mi punto de vista means my point of view. And the word, repitan, la vista means view or sight. At another moment, I said, a mi ver. We know that the verb ver means to see. Well, the expression a mi ver means as I see it. So right there are three expressions you'll find useful when you want to express an opinion about something. Repitan, en mi opinión, desde mi punto de vista, a mi ver. I also said in the introduction that, as I see it, a mi ver, using both an indirect and a direct object pronoun in the same sentence is bastante complicado, which in English is rather complicated. So, you should know the cognates, repitan, complicar, complicado. Muy bien. Ahora vamos a entrar al tema de la pronunciación. In a previous lesson, we looked at two kinds of sounds made in Spanish. Those that are the same as those made in English, and the two sounds, and r, that don't exist at all in English. Students have to learn the sound, but they pronounce it without difficulty. And the r, as I explained previously, can be tricky for some language learners. But students tend to work hard to improve their ability to pronounce r correctly. In fact, the more difficult the sound is, the harder language learners tend to work to make it. So, that leads me to a curious thing about pronouncing words in Spanish. Most often, the real problems for English speakers when they speak Spanish aren't the hard sounds. They're the ones that seem easy. Why is that? Well, Quite often, the pronunciation problems come from the sounds that the Spanish language learners think are the same as English, but in fact are different. And where does this problem come from? Well, it comes from the spelling, from the written word, which is not your friend when it comes to pronunciation. Students will look at or think about the way a word is spelled and will often fall back on the English pronunciation of those letters. That's a problem I'd like to help you avoid. Evitar. The proper approach to pronouncing words correctly in Spanish is really twofold. Point number one, you need to listen really well to the way words are pronounced in Spanish. If you don't listen attentively, you won't recognize the exact sound you should be making. And when I say listen, I don't just mean the listening you do in these lessons and in the speaking activities. No, that's not enough. You should also be listening to Spanish beyond the course. The internet, radio, television, intercambios, tus amigos que hablan español. There are lots of ways you can come in contact with spoken Spanish, and you should be doing so often. So, you need to listen a lot and listen well. What else? Well, point number two, you need to work diligently to make the specific sounds Spanish speakers make. Don't go on autopilot. If you do, you'll make English-sounding sounds. Keep your focus on making the sounds made in the Spanish language. And here's one final note before we begin. I've spent many years helping beginning students learn to speak Spanish and helping more advanced students improve their speaking. So the specific sounds we'll be working on and the guidance I'll give you for making those sounds are based on my experience helping students just like you. So when I say, for instance, that you shouldn't pronounce a certain sound in a certain way, I'm working to help you avoid, evitar, the common pronunciation mistakes I often hear from Spanish language learners. One more thing before we begin this pronunciation parade. As we work to improve your ability to make the proper sounds, I'll also be introducing you to some new vocabulary. Let's start with the 5 vowel sounds in Spanish. Repitan. A, E, I, O, U. You'll notice that all of these vowel sounds are consistent. What I mean by that is these vowels maintain the same sound from the beginning to the end of their production. Repeat again as I intentionally elongate each of these vowel sounds. A, E, I, O, U. Now, repeat them one more time at their normal length. A, E, I, O, U. Okay, you may be thinking, not hard, really, let's move on. Well, we will, but in a moment. But first, let me show you the common mistakes that language learners make when pronouncing these vowel sounds. The sound A tends not to cause problems, but the other 4 vowel sounds do. E, for instance, is E. It's not EY. I is I. It's not I. O is O. It's not O. U is U. It's not U. We have the tendency, when speaking English, to close off these vowels and make sounds like A, I, O, and U. Don't do it. Those sounds that exist in English start with the mouth open wider and end with the mouth more closed. Watch. A, I, O, U. That's not at all what we want. In Spanish, the initial position of the mouth stays the same throughout the pronunciation of the vowel sound. Watch. A, E, I, O, U. So, keep your vowel sound short and consistent. Say this sentence aloud. Say it one more time. Okay, I hope you said it with short, consistent vowels, as in, no sé cómo se llaman los chicos. I hope you did not close off the vowels at the end and say, no sé cómo se llaman los chicos. Okay, so it would be unusual to pronounce it with that exaggerated an accent, but I often hear students saying something like, no sé cómo se llaman los chicos. What you really want, of course, is repitan. No sé cómo se llaman los chicos. Otra vez. No sé cómo se llaman los chicos. Let's make those Spanish vowel sounds one more time. This time in reverse order. U, O, I, E, A. If you keep your vowel sounds short and consistent, you'll be making the appropriate Spanish sounds. Another common problem students have is with consonants that are aspirated in English but not in Spanish. An aspirated consonant means that when you make the sound of the consonant, you also produce a puff of air. Let's look at this starting with the letter T. Put your hand in front of your mouth, like this, and repeat these words in English. Text, eternal, attack, talent, taxi, tension. So, you should feel air on your hand when you make the T sound for these words in English. One more time in English. Text, eternal, attack, talent, taxi, tension. Now, in Spanish, make sure that you make no puff of air when you pronounce the T sound in these words. And why? Because the T is not aspirated in Spanish. So, put your hand up to your mouth again and repeat these words I'm about to say. Repitan. El texto, eterno, el ataque, el talento, el taxi, la tensión. Those 6 words, as you can see, are all cognates. And your T in Spanish should really be like a cross between a T and a D. And you should not aspirate the sound. One more time. El texto, eterno, el ataque, el talento, el taxi, la tensión. Bien. ¿Hay mucha tensión en tu vida? Espero que no. Demasiada tensión puede causar un ataque de corazón. Like the letter T, the letter B is not aspirated in Spanish, though it can be aspirated in English. Repeat these English words and feel the puff of air on your hand. Baseball, bank, basketball. Now, say these words in Spanish, and you should not feel that puff of air. El béisbol, el banco, el basketball. Let's consider 2 final sounds that are aspirated in English but not in Spanish, starting with the letter P. Repeat these new words, but don't make a puff of air when you pronounce the letter. Percibir, la pasión, la sorpresa, sorprender, la posesión. La fiesta me sorprendió mucho. Sí, fue una sorpresa total. Here's a sentence you should get used to saying. Repitan. Mi pasión es la lengua española. Otra vez. Mi pasión es la lengua española. Muy bien. Y alguien que tiene mucha pasión es apasionado. Y ahora 2 palabras nuevas más. Una persona que lee es, repitan, un lector. Si la persona es una chica o una mujer, es una lectora. Y el acto de leer se llama, repitan, la lectura. Puedo decir, por ejemplo, que Sara es una lectora apasionada. Siempre tiene 2 o 3 libros que está leyendo. La lectura es su pasión. The final sound that can be aspirated in English, but not in Spanish, is the one made by the letter K or by the letter C before A, O, or U. K hardly occurs in Spanish, though we have seen it in el kilo, el kilómetro. Right now, I'd like you to make the acquaintance of some new words that have a C followed by A, O, or U, meaning they make the K sound. And when you pronounce these words, make sure you're not aspirating the K sound. Repitan. Consumir. El conflicto. Concentrar. Calcular. Pregunta. ¿Cuánto café consumes? ¿Consumes una taza al día o más? ¿Puedes calcular cuántos cafés consumes cada semana? En mi caso, creo que consumo más o menos 10 tazas a la semana. Y ahora, nosotros concluimos esta sección sobre la pronunciación. In an earlier lesson, we looked at indirect object pronouns, which answer the question to whom or for whom in relation to the verb. You'll remember there are how many of them? 6. The 3 singular forms are me, te, le. The 3 plural forms are nos, os, les. And these indirect object pronouns go where in relation to a conjugated verb? Before. Okay, good. Now let's talk about direct object pronouns. They also go before conjugated verbs, and they answer the questions who or what in relation to the verb. How many direct object pronouns are there? Right, 8. The singular forms are me, te, lo, la. The plural of me is nos. The plural of lo is los. The plural of la is las. And the plural of te is, well, it's os in Spain, where the informal plural form of vosotros is used. In all parts of Latin America, the plural of te is either los or las, depending on whether the people being referred to are male or female. How would you tell your friend, I understand you? Te entiendo. You could also say te comprendo, but entender is used much more commonly than comprender. The word advantage is, repitan, la ventaja. With reference to las ventajas, how would you say, I don't see them? No las veo. One more. How would you say to a salesman in a store, I hear you, but I don't understand you? Lo oigo, pero no lo entiendo. And I'm using lo because the salesperson is someone I would refer to as usted and not tú. If it's a saleswoman, I would say la oigo, pero no la entiendo. Let's see some more direct object pronouns in action. And by action, I mean lights, camera, action. Because you are now going to watch a scene from a heist film set in Panama. You'll see how useful direct object pronouns are to our 2 bank robbers, Andrea and Paco, as they make their getaway without their partners in crime, Jose and Marcos. Our protagonists may not have the most respectable profession, but their grammar is fantastic. In this scene, I will be Paco, and my colleague Laura will play the role of Andrea.
Paco, ¿dónde está el dinero?
¿Qué dices? No te oigo.
¿El dinero? ¿Dónde está?
No lo tengo. Ay, ¿qué pasó con José y Marcos? ¿Los viste?
No, no los vi nunca fuera del banco.
¿Y los policías nos siguen?
No, no están siguiéndonos en este momento, pero pronto van a empezar a buscarnos.
¿Y qué debemos hacer con José y Marcos?
Pues tenemos que encontrarlos. Tienen todo nuestro dinero.
¿Y cómo sabes que lo tienen ellos?
Porque si no lo tienes tú y no lo tengo yo, tienen que tenerlo ellos.
¿Y qué les pasa a nuestros protagonistas? Ustedes van a tener que ir a un cine para mirar toda la película. So let's return to the scene of the crime so we can analyze how our thieves made use of direct object pronouns. I'm sure you noticed the direct object pronouns before conjugated verbs in very many of the sentences. I'll give you the Spanish, you give me the English. No te oigo. I don't hear you. No lo tengo. I don't have it. ¿Los viste? Did you see them? No los vi. I didn't see them. ¿Nos siguen? Are they following us? ¿Lo tienen? They have it. No lo tengo yo y no lo tienes tú. I don't have it and you don't have it. Did you also notice the times when the pronoun went after and attached to the verb form? This can only happen with the two verb forms that are not conjugated, the infinitive and the present participle. Once again, give me the English for my Spanish. No están siguiéndonos. They are not following us. Van a empezar a buscarnos. They are going to begin to look for us. Tenemos que encontrarlos. We have to find them. Ellos deben tenerlo. They must have it. Tenemos que encontrarlos, we need to find them, shows the los after and attached to the infinitive encontrar. Andrea also could have said, los tenemos que encontrar, putting the los before the conjugated verb tenemos. But she used the more common construction of putting it after and attached to the infinitive. And it's similar with the present participle siguiendo. Andrea said, no están siguiéndonos. They are not following us, putting the nos after the present participle siguiendo. She also could have put the nos before the conjugated verb and said, no nos están siguiendo. But once again, our Panamanian thief used the more common practice of putting the direct object pronoun after and attached to the present participle. En mi opinión. Mastering direct object pronouns and double object pronouns, which we're about to look at, is a matter of being exposed to them a lot. With time, with lots of examples, and with practice, you will learn to use the right pronouns and put them in their proper place. Now, let's discuss double object pronouns, which is what we call it when you have both an indirect and a direct object pronoun in the same sentence. Here are the 3 rules you need to keep in mind when dealing with this tema bastante complicado. Rule number 1, order. The indirect object pronoun always precedes the direct object pronoun, always. Just in the way that you now see the indirect object pronouns before the direct object pronouns, your sentences must maintain this order as well. Here are some examples showing this proper order. ¿Quieres este pan? Te lo doy. Note how the te, our indirect object pronoun, meaning to you, precedes the lo, it, representing the bread. Here's another. Las camisas son bonitas. ¿Quién os las compró? Once again, os, the indirect object pronoun, meaning for you, precedes the direct object pronoun, las. Now, here are 2 examples I'd like you to tell me. With reference to la comida, how would you say, my father prepares it for us? Mi padre nos la prepara. The indirect object pronoun nos, for us, precedes the direct object pronoun la. And if you're talking about los cafés, how would you say, Adela always gives them to me? Adela siempre me los da. I want you to get used to using double object pronouns, so repeat these 4 sentences. Te lo doy. ¿Quién os las compró? Mi padre nos la prepara. Adela siempre me los da. Bien. That brings us to rule number 2, placement. The indirect and direct object pronouns, in that order, indirect before direct, must go before a conjugated verb. They also can go after and attached to either an infinitive or a present participle. That's the new rule you need to learn. But hold on. Wait a minute. This somehow looks familiar. Have we seen this before? Of course. That's the same placement with relation to a verb that's required both in the case of indirect object pronouns used alone or direct object pronouns used alone. So, in fact, there's nothing new to be remembered here because we already know this placement rule. This brings us to our third and final rule. I call this the rule of se. And here is the rule of se. When the indirect object pronoun is le or les, and the following direct object pronoun is lo, la, los, or las, the indirect object pronoun changes to se. Repeat after me these possible combinations with the indirect object pronouns me and te. Melo, mela, melos, melas, telo, tela, telos, telas. So, me and te are fine to use with lo, la, los, las. But if the indirect object pronoun is le or les, and the direct object pronoun also starts with el, meaning it is lo, la, los, or las, that's when the le or les becomes se. What tends to make double object pronouns hard is that there's a lot going on when you use them. You need to figure out the indirect object pronoun and make sure it goes before the direct object pronoun. But wait, if both start with the letter L, then the indirect object pronoun changes to se. And then both of these must go before a conjugated verb, so you also have to think about the verb you're using and conjugate it properly. Since we're practicing here, let me make it easy for you. Let's use just one verb and do our practice with the pronouns. Our verb will be they give, which is dan. Repitan, dan. So, our verb is always dan. On the screen, you can now see to whom something is being given and what is being given. Use the proper pronouns and say the sentences in Spanish. Remember, our verb is dan. Sentence number 1 is me los dan. Number 2 is se la dan. Notice how the a ellos, which usually is les, needs to become se before la. Okay, number 3 is nos lo dan. Here are a few more examples of se, and with these examples, I want you to tell me the whole sentence. We know the verb to send is mandar. We just learned the word text, which is el texto. Plural of el texto is los textos. We send them to him is se los mandamos. And note that se los mandamos has a variety of possible meanings. It could mean we send them to him, to her, to them, to usted, or to ustedes. And this is the case because se can mean either le or les. That's why it's very common in Spanish when using se to make very clear to whom you're referring. A more typical example of what I just said would be something like se los mandamos a Juan or se los mandamos a ustedes. In fact, let's look at one more example that uses se, and we'll go back to they give, dan, as our verb. This sentence is se las dan a Raúl. Bien. Here's one last example. In this case, we'll be using the verb to show, which is mostrar, with reference to las sorpresas. How would you say to your friend, I can show them to you? But wait, just a moment. If we put the indirect and direct object pronouns after the infinitive, then I can show them to you is puedo mostrártelas. If we put the pronouns before the conjugated verb, we'll have te las puedo mostrar. In the workbook and the speaking activities, you'll have the opportunity to do more practice with both direct object pronouns, double object pronouns, and with the new vocabulary we've seen. Before we conclude the lesson, I think I should teach you 3 of the most important words in the film industry. After all, in this lesson we saw a scene from una película panameña. Repitan: la luz, la cámara, la acción. So, when actually used on a set, what the director will say is, repitan, luces, cámara, acción. Now, repeat the whole thing after I say it. Luces, cámara, acción. Fenomenal. Y con esto concluimos nuestra lección número 10. Hasta pronto.
Glosario en audio, lección 10.
Give the Spanish for the following English words. Then repeat the Spanish word. To avoid.
Evitar,
Opinion.
la opinión,
View. Sight.
la vista,
Point of view.
el punto de vista,
As I see it.
a mi ver,
To complicate.
complicar,
Complicated.
complicado,
Text.
el texto,
Eternal.
eterno,
Attack.
el ataque,
Tension.
la tensión,
To perceive. To notice.
percibir,
Passion.
la pasión,
Passionate.
apasionado,
Surprise.
la sorpresa,
To surprise.
sorprender,
Reader.
el lector,
Reading.
la lectura,
To consume.
consumir,
Conflict.
el conflicto,
To concentrate.
concentrar,
To calculate.
calcular,
Advantage.
la ventaja,
Light.
la luz,
Camera.
la cámara. Actividades de conversación. Lección 10.
Repeat the following words.
Primo. Soltero. Hospital. Estadio. Proyecto. Helado. Cuñado. Muerto. Perro. Pero. Caro. Carro. hermano, largo, corto, sombrero, hambre, hombre, guacamole.
Answer the following questions by saying yes, then use a direct object pronoun in your answer. For example, ¿visitaste a tu hermana?
Sí, la visité.
¿Compraste los boletos de avión?
Sí, los compré.
¿Vendiste tu carro?
Sí, lo vendí.
¿Me llamas más tarde?
Sí, te llamo más tarde.
¿Ellos enviaron las invitaciones?
Sí, ellos las enviaron. O sí, las enviaron.
¿Estás haciendo tu tarea ahora?
Sí, la estoy haciendo.
¿Estás llevando a tu perro a caminar?
Sí, estoy llevándolo. O sí, lo estoy llevando.
¿Ustedes están escuchando la buena noticia?
Sí, estamos escuchándola. O sí, la estamos escuchando.
Answer the following questions by saying yes. Then, use a double object pronoun in your answer. For example, ¿compraste las entradas al concierto para Elisa?
Sí, se las compré.
¿Le pediste una cita a la secretaria del doctor?
Sí, se la pedí.
¿Estás enviando un correo a los estudiantes?
Sí, se lo estoy enviando. O sí, estoy enviándoselo.
¿Tú y tus hijos están dando dulces a los niños?
Sí, se los estamos dando. O sí, estamos dándoselos.
¿Ustedes nos compraron estos juguetes?
Sí, se los compramos.
¿Usted va a cuidar al perro de su vecino?
Sí, voy a cuidárselo. O sí, se lo voy a cuidar.
Replace the direct object and indirect object in the following sentences with pronouns. For example, tú compraste un regalo para tu hermano.
Tú se lo compraste.
Los muchachos les cantaron canciones a las muchachas.
Los muchachos se las cantaron.
Usted escribió una carta a su novia.
Usted se la escribió.
Marcos les da los libros a los estudiantes.
Marcos se los da.
José lee un cuento a su hijo.
José se lo lee.
Siempre le pongo azúcar al café.
Siempre se lo pongo.
Ustedes nos envían dinero.
Ustedes nos lo envían.
Estoy preparando la cena para los invitados.
Estoy preparándosela o se la estoy preparando.
Tú nos cocinaste estos bocadillos.
Tú nos los cocinaste.
Ella está entregando los balones a los muchachos.
Ella se los está entregando o ella está entregándoselos.
Mi padre nos dio una sorpresa.
Él nos la dio.
Estoy escribiendo un mensaje para mi jefe.
Estoy escribiéndoselo o se lo estoy escribiendo.